Today I'm joined by Sandra Besic. Sandra is Olympian in 1972, representing Canada in figure skating.
Yes.
Since then, Sandra has choreographed some of the top names in figure skating. She's an author, a producer, and TV commentator. Welcome, Sandra.
Thank you, Christian. It's a pleasure to be here.
Sandra, looking at your CV, obviously there's a lifelong passion for figure skating. How did it all start?
I was 3 years old when my mother put me on the ice. She had dreamed of being a figure skater when she was a child, and she was the daughter of immigrants here in Canada, and they were very, very poor, and they couldn't afford ice skates for her. And so she dreamed of it her whole life. And so the minute I could walk, I don't remember not being able to skate. My brother and I were put on the ice immediately. He's older than I am. And it all started when I was 3.
Yeah. And then in your athletic life, what was your darkest moment?
Oh, I think looking back, my darkest moment was at the end of my competitive career. My brother and I was very young, I think, to start on the international scene. I was 12 years old when I started competing internationally. I was national champion at 13. By 17, we had won 5 national titles. We had competed in the World Championships for 5 years, the Olympics in 72, as you mentioned. And we had traveled the world competing and performing. And all through that, I was also trying to maintain my schooling. And I think what happened in the end was that I was just burnt out. It was so focused and so tunnel visioned that I had no life besides skating. And it was wonderful, but it was still a lot for a young girl growing up. And I got injured. I tore the ligaments in my ankle, and everything just sort of started to unravel. And I think the combination of being burnt out and being 17 and going through the natural, development that all kids go through. I really had a tough time. I left the sport. I quit and kind of was lost. I didn't have a sense of my identity without skates on. My life had been programmed in a certain direction from the time I was 3, really. And I had been obedient up until that time. I performed. I was the show pony. I seemed invincible. And then all of a sudden I wasn't. And we also at that time in the 70s, coaching was quite different. And there wasn't a support system that there is now. And so I had really no one to turn to, and I felt responsible for all of it. I felt like a failure. I felt like I'd let the country down. My brother, whom I skated with, we were pair skaters. My family, everything just caved in. And so that, for sure, was my darkest period. And it's actually a time I don't even really talk about that much, even now.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I left the sport for 3 years, at least. It's sort of all vague in my mind. I basically kind of ran away from home and yeah.
And I've written that down. At the Olympics in 72, you were young. You were 16 years old.
Yeah, I was 15. It was just before my 16th birthday. So I was actually 15 at the Olympics.
And then you became a professional skater a little bit later?
Yeah, I think after that period where I stopped, I slowly kind of crawled back to the sport and tried to figure out where my place was. We did some performing as professionals, but not a lot. And at the same time, I started I knew I didn't necessarily want to be a coach, although I liked coaching. But what I did was I really searched for a niche that I could fill. And at the time, there were no choreographers really who were figure skaters, or there were few. I certainly didn't know any, and all the choreographers, well, first of all, the coaches did all the choreography. Choreographers were very rare. And then if there were choreographers, they were usually from the dance world. Like we worked with a dancer, a jazz dancer, and then another ballet dancer. So I kind of thought, well, what can I offer that's unique to me? And so I decided to kind of put the word out to coaches in the area that I would be willing to help them as a choreographer. And that's how it started. At the same time, I was still performing a little bit, and so it was just I was just finding my way.
Yeah. What was your best moment as an athlete?
It's interesting because it's all kind of a blur for me. It's like it was another person. But I think my best moments were the moments when, as a performer, you hit that sweet spot. So there wasn't necessarily a particular moment, but that moment that you strive for, that happens every once in a while, where it all comes together and your body and your emotions and your connection as a performer with the audience all come together, and it's like you're invincible for those few minutes. I think competitors experience that, and that's what keeps you going. So I had some of those. So I wouldn't say just one moment, but that moment. And that's the kind of moment that I try to give now to my students or the people I choreograph, or the people with whom I work.
And what do you think contributes to this moment? Because it's an interesting one, right? So you want to have that everything falling into place.
Yeah, when the stars align.
Yeah.
Training. It's the preparation, and then it's the ability to let go and trust that preparation. So it's the ability to be in the moment, to find that Zen place where you think exactly the right thoughts in that moment. But that takes training, because you need to know without a doubt. You need to have no doubts, and then be open to that experience and not second guess yourself, and not, there's those little voices that go on in your brain, and there's this side, and then there's this side, and then there's this side, then you hear your coach's voice, and then you hear your mother's voice, and then you hear, and it's blocking that out and finding that inner strength. But it really does. I mean, I don't think I think that a lot of people are born with the ability to hit that sweet spot more easily. I do think it's trainable. But for everybody, there's basically no secret. You've got to prepare.
Yeah. Yeah, you mentioned a few interesting points that I've noted down for later questions, but it fits very well here. You said some people have the innate ability, or little bit of that. You have worked with some of the greatest stars in figure skating. So you had Katarina Witt, Brian Boitano, Jamie Saleh, who was interviewed here.
Yes.
But also other Olympic champions.
Yeah.
What would you say do they all have in common? Is there some kind of a quote-unquote superstar trait?
Yes, I think so. I think it's a self-knowledge. I think it's they know who they are and where they need to go mentally to find that sweet spot. They, in their core, simply know. It's pretty amazing. And there is a difference. There's a real difference between the gold medalist and everyone else that I've seen.
Yeah, I always had this kind of, I always was fascinated by Katharina Witt. I mean, if you don't know by my accent, I'm German.
So am I. I mean, not German, fascinated by Katharina.
I was 9 years old when she competed in '84 at the Olympics, and somehow it's because it's a sport where you have to be so gracious, but on the other side, it's athletic ability, and it's just an incredible combination that she had.
Yes, she's remarkable. I actually just saw her. She just came to Canada, actually just before COVID. She's a network is producing a television special about her life, and she wanted to interview me. She wanted me part of the show, and so she and her producer came to visit for a day. So we spent a day about 2 months ago now, and it was just so nice to see her again. I mean, we are dear friends. I first got to know her actually after Calgary Olympics, after '88, as a professional. And then I worked with her from that point on. And when she returned to the Olympics in '94, but, you know, we're lifelong friends. She's remarkable. She's certainly one of a kind. Tough as nails, but still joyous. I think that's the thing about Katharina. I mean, she has such innate confidence, but it's and joy that comes with that. That it's such an inspiration to be around her, actually. And she's been consistent throughout her whole life, where she always finds, in any circumstance, the silver lining. And she doesn't take herself serious. She takes herself seriously in the moment. She takes her work seriously, but she doesn't take herself seriously. She's very quick to laugh at herself and see the humor in her character. So she's a remarkable champion.
Yeah. Talking about the 1988 Olympics, you choreographed for Brian Boitano, who ended up winning that competition, right? And to this date, it's still one of the toughest duels in Olympic history between Brian Boitano and Brian Orser. If you do a choreography, how do you start? I mean, what's the thought process, and how do you put something into place for people who don't understand figure skating that well?
Yes, well, figure skating choreography is specific because you're building a vehicle for a competition. And so what I do, and everybody has their own way, every choreographer has their own way of approaching it, and there's no right or wrong, it's just your way. But what I try to do is find sort of the core essence of that skater and what their goals and dreams are, and their character personality traits, and bring that out in the performance. Find a vehicle, whether it's, you know, a story or just a piece of music that connects to them, to their core self. I try to build material that is authentic and genuine, and then that way they really take ownership, and it really is intended to be a vehicle for their dreams. So when Brian came to me, Brian and his coach, we had under a year. I'd never worked with him before, and he came to me after the World Championships in '87. So we had, 8 months, 9 months to find this. And so I studied him. I studied the way he moved. I studied, sort of how he responded to things, to figure out what movements looked best on him, what style looked best on him. And the thing that really I was taken with was his size. He's, you know, taller than, I mean, he's not extremely tall, but taller than the average figure skater. He's probably, I don't know, maybe 5'10", but his skating was larger than life. And so I wanted to make programs for him that were as large as he was in practice. And he was also very shy. So in a way, I gave him characters that he was able to hide behind, but they were still revealing his true self. So there, I mean, when I work, there are so many layers. There's two sides. There's the whole technical side of laying out a program so that technically it can be exact and every jump is placed where it needs to be placed and paced where it needs to be paced, you know, so that there's ebbs and flows and breath and times to rest and times to push. And you know, it has its technical arc. But then for me, I need a creative arc. I need the artistic arc. I need to take the audience and judges on a journey, on an emotional journey. So those two things have to work together. And the skater has to own it. They have to believe in it, feel it, breathe it, train it, and own it. I don't know. Is that answering your question? I mean, it's a journey, and it's also daunting because it's not like you're just doing a piece of choreography that, you know, goes out there and whatever. It has an impact on somebody's career, and that's daunting. So I take it, when I do it, I take it very, very seriously. And you know, you become obsessed with trying to get it right.
Yeah. I guess that's also a trademark of the successful people around an athlete, that they take it very, very serious.
Yes.
That the athlete has to, or they take ownership of
yes.
the performance of the athlete. Yeah.
Yes. I know you have to take ownership yourself as the coach, choreographer, director. But then you also have to teach them to take ownership.
Yeah.
And then once they do, you know, it's like, you know, the trainer wheels are off and, you know, they ride away.
Talking about this Olympics, I have a bonus question for you. Brian, the Olympics 1988,
yes,
the Winter Olympics were in Canada.
Yes.
Brian Orser was supposed to be the first Canadian male figure skating Olympic champion.
I know.
You are Canadian, and you kind of did your part to prevent that. Were there any kind of resentments, animosities, or criticism after that?
Well, you know how the press is. They come in every 4 years. I mean, there's a certain core press who follow skating all the time. And then there's the press that comes in every 4 years for the Olympics. The press that came in every 4 years kind of, you know, looked at it from, in a way, not as educated point of view and thought, oh, here's this Canadian helping, you know, an American, and tried to make a bit of a story of it. But in fact, the skating community knows that we are pretty borderless, and coaches and choreographers work with all nations, and, you know, we're borderless. And Brian Orser already had a choreographer of his own who happened to be American. The press kind of forgot that part of the story because we were in Canada. But it wasn't bad. It was minimal, and it was from those who don't know the sport, really. I think that in the end, it was all about the performance, and both men were extraordinary, both nights. And what Brian Orser did, I mean, Brian Orser had so much pressure on his shoulders. going into that competition. And he was outstanding. He just happened to be competing against Brian Boitano, who had the performance of his life. And that was, the difference. It was like that.
Yeah. I wanted to dig a little bit into, I saw in an interview you said after your athletic career, you made a conscious decision to become a choreographer.
Yes.
And you just outlined a little bit of that. What I wanted to know is, in recent years, we have heard a lot about set an intention and the rest will follow, but I guess we forget the part of there has to be some work put in.
Yeah.
So you set an intention, and within 1 year, you had one of the top Canadian teams, I think, that you choreographed, right? So how did you work from setting the intention towards getting to where you wanted to get?
That's interesting. I never thought of it that way. Obviously, I'm aware of setting intentions now. I never applied it to what I actually did. But I guess I did. But what was easy for me was it was serendipitous in a way. And maybe when you put yourself out there, the energy of the universe just takes you. I called coaches and just said, I'm available. I'll come and do what you want. I'll work with you, I'll partner with you, whatever you need. And within under a year, Lewis and Mary Jane Stong phoned me because they were about to start working with the Canadian pair champions, Barbara Underhill and Paul Martini. Lewis Stong was to be their coach. He didn't want to do it by himself. He heard that I was out and about. I was recently retired. I was a pair skater. So it made perfect sense. And he called me to see if I would collaborate with him. And it was really ideal for me because I was actually more comfortable working at the elite level than I would have been with younger skaters, because it was a level that I was completely familiar with. I'd been competing all these years. It's all I knew. So I very much knew what it needed to feel like to compete, to be comfortable with your choreography, with your material, to compete at your very best. So in fact, it was very easy for me to fly in to that top level because that was home. And it was serendipitous. I mean, he gave me the call. I said, yes, of course. And off we went. And that's where I learned kind of, parallel with Barb and Paul. And we started a friendship, a professional relationship. We went through everything together, and we still text each other through COVID. We're very, very close. So I was very lucky. So yes, in fact, I did set an intention, and it did work. That's good to know. I'm never that. You see, I'm not a linear thinker. I'm all over the place. I bounce. I'm a choreographer. Right? I've got both sides. I can be very organized as a producer. You have to be organized, and you have. But for me to get there, my mind ping pongs, and I know that about myself. So I'm not sure that I've ever set intentions, but maybe I should try. But I'm also open. I'm always open to new ventures, new ideas. I love new experiences. I love to be scared to death to try something that I've never done before. So whenever the phone rings, I say yes. Before I even think sometimes.
Okay, cool. Talking about being a producer, you are producer and co-creator of the Battle of Blades.
Yes.
For those ones who don't know, can you describe in a few words what the Battle of Blades is?
Well, the Battle of the Blades is a reality series in Canada. It's something that my life partner and I created together. And we took the idea of Dancing with the Stars, but we applied it to us, to Canadians. And we combined hockey players, ex-NHL retired hockey players with top female figure skaters who are pair skaters and ice dancers. And we created Dancing with the Stars like series. It's live. Our first was 10, 11 years ago. And it became the highest rated original series in Canada in history. It's still. And it just captured the Canadian imagination. I mean, our two sports are figure skating and hockey. And certainly hockey players are our heroes. And the opportunity to watch these hockey players skate as figure skaters, you know, without their uniforms and everything, was really compelling to the public. And the underlying reason for all of this was for charity. The winners, each of the pairs win a certain amount of money for their charity of choice, and the winners win $100,000. And so in the process, we've raised, you know, millions of dollars, or over. I mean, our series stopped and started a few times, so we've had 5. But we've raised significant amounts of money and attention for Canadian charities. And so that also is a very Canadian kind of character trait. And so it all kind of just worked. It's been a lot of fun, but it's just something we cooked up in our kitchen.
Yeah, that's now my follow-up question. Is it something, did you realize there was a demand for such a show, or was it something that you just wanted to do because you were passionate about it?
Well, it was just a fun idea. And we had been watching Dancing with the Stars. It had just started in the States. And you know, one of those rare occasions when he was also watching that show, and he looked at me, and he was a hockey agent and, you know, sort of a sports agent. And he said to me, "Do you think we could ever do this with hockey players and figure skaters?" And my answer was, if it has greater purpose, if there was a charity involved or something. I didn't want it to be a gong show. I didn't want it to be salacious in any way. I didn't want it to be, you know, like that. I wanted it to be more meaningful and powerful. So I mean, it was just an idea. We wrote it up. We had a relationship with television producers, a production company with whom we had made several specials. And in Canada, there have been lots of skating specials, TV specials, and that kind of thing that I'd either choreographed or produced or, you know, was involved with in some way. And so we took it to them, and together we went to the networks. And CBC immediately loved the idea, but it took 3 years for them to finally green light us. So it took quite some time. It's an expensive show, and it took a lot of time and planning, and it's a monster. It's a real monster because the series itself lasts 7 or 8 weeks. We train for a month prior to that. And we look after them like they're elite athletes that they are. And we make sure that they're surrounded by the best coaches and choreographers and safe, you know, that it's 100% safe, that these big guys are now in figure skates lifting these women. But it seems to work. And then we did 4 seasons, and then they put us on hiatus because there were governmental changes, and CBC is a government network, and they lost some of their funding. And so we thought it was over after that. And just last season, they came back and said, "Could you please bring it back?" So we did 1 more season last September, and now because of COVID, we'll see. So that's the long story.
Okay, cool. So what else is going on in Sandra's life at this moment in time?
Well, a lot of productions now are up in the air because of COVID. We don't know where this is all going to take us. So I had a number of shows or small tours internationally that were to happen, that were either canceled or delayed. I love to work on productions. I love to do live shows as well as television shows, to create them. And we had made 2 in Spain in December 18 and 19. Now with Spain and everything that they're going through, I mean, it's heartbreaking. Some of the arenas that we trained in are the arenas that are now being used as morgues. And it's heartbreaking. So I do hope that we're able to return and somehow give back to, I mean, it's such a beautiful country, and it's beautiful people, and it would be nice to be able to give back in some way. So yes, I have these shows that are maybe not like everybody else. So what am I doing right now? I'm, painting my basement and organizing my closets and reading, and also emotionally up and down like everybody else, and trying to take this time. But I also waste many days, I'm sure, like everybody else. It's not been easy for anybody, but we've been, we're some of the lucky ones. It hasn't touched us in our immediate families. So we've been very, very lucky.
Do you want to nominate someone for an interview?
Oh gosh. Let's see. Yeah, this is a question I hadn't thought of. Well, another choreographer, I don't know, is David Wilson. And he's another Canadian. It's interesting that so many Canadians have become choreographers. But David Wilson choreographed Yuna Kim, who is the first Korean Olympic champion. And she pretty much, she brought figure skating to Korea and is an extraordinary woman. David and I just did a show in Korea last spring, actually, for Yuna. And he has been instrumental in many skaters' lives. Joanie Rochette, who was Olympian in Japan, in Vancouver as well, and lived through that incredible performance where, I mean, her mother had passed away just several days before her Olympic performance, and she won a medal. So it's
I saw that one.
Yes. Worked with Joanie, with Yuna, with Javier Fernandez, who brought figure skating to Spain, and he's one of the leading choreographers. So in solidarity with other choreographers, I would nominate David.
Cool. Where can people find you?
Oh, well, I mean, I have a website that I blogged during Sochi. I reported during Sochi Olympics. I blogged during Pyeongchang because it was the first Olympics, and I don't know how many that I wasn't attending, and I didn't know what to do with myself at home. So I wrote a blog, and I've got this website, but I haven't looked at it since 2018. I'm really, really bad at that and self-promotion and all of that. But if you do want to look, and that's probably how you found me, is smbcreative.ca. Is, I'll update it. I'm just not good at it.
Okay. Any other social profiles? Instagram is the big thing at this moment.
Yeah, I tweet. And my handle is just Sandra Bezic. And I started in Instagram, and so I dabble with that. I have about 2 followers on Instagram. I don't have any followers. But maybe after your show, you know, thousands will follow. Sandra_Bezic. Anyway.
I actually do follow Katharina Witt, and I think in one story she mentioned your name. So if she can't get you more followers, don't expect too much from me.
That's true. Well, yeah, that's because she was here, and so we were Instagramming about each other and tweeting about each other. She's yes, that's true.
Sandra, thanks a lot for your time.
Thank you very much. And you take care. Stay healthy. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.